Hi, welcome to the Bear and Maiden Fair podcast. I'm Liz Loxley.
I'm Mia Moore.
And we are here to talk about how we got into Game of Thrones. So we decided to start this podcast because we always, as best friends, talk about Game of Thrones for like 6 hours at a time. So we decided that we should record it and other people can listen to us talk about Game of Thrones for 6 hours at a time. So Mia,
if you're so inclined.
So Mia, how did you get into Game of Thrones?
Okay. I knew you were going to ask me this question, and I already knew that I wasn't sure what the answer was. So I've been trying to think about it since we came up with these questions, and I can't remember if you started watching it first or I'm pretty sure you did, because I was like, Game of Thrones is going to be scary, and I'm afraid of horror and gore. And you were like, no, it's not that bad. You should watch. Okay. I think that's what happened.
So maybe I should start with my story first.
Yeah, you should add it.
Okay. So I first watched Game of Thrones right when it came out because I'm really into fantasy. But as it turns out, the first season is incredibly boring and I hate Ned Stark. We could do a whole episode about how much I hate Ned Stark, but the first season's about Ned Stark. And so I was like, I don't really like this, etc., etc. So years later, you get access to HBO Go, and you're like, I think I want to watch Game of Thrones, but I think it's going to be scary. And I was like, no, you should watch it and tell me how you feel about it. And you're like, okay, I'll do that. And you're like, oh, it's super, super great, like after the first season, because we talk like Valley Girls. And at that same time, Telltale had announced that they were doing the Game of Thrones video game series. And I was thinking, oh, I could play a Telltale game without having to deal with zombies, because they only really had the Walking Dead franchise at the time. So I was like, this sounds great. Get into Game of Thrones. Tell me about it. And then I got into Game of Thrones, and we haven't looked back since. I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, I distinctly remember that we were like, I'm not really interested in Game of Thrones, but I feel like we should watch it so we can figure out what house we are. You said it was like Harry Potter. Yeah, and I was like, yeah, that's a good idea. Well, now that we've watched it, it's like there's not really one house that you can be in because they're all kind of great and terrible in their own ways. So, if that's your reason for watching Game of Thrones, give up now.
And also, like, the houses that we turned out to like didn't even come into play until this recent season, because I like Martell and you like Tyrell. So yeah. It's just like, oh, okay, yeah, the Starks, nah.
All the main houses are kind of boring or like mostly dead.
Or evil. But I still like the Lannisters.
Do you hear my cat in the background? Because he will not shut up.
I do, and I feel like our listeners will have to too. Because one day I'll have dogs in the background, it'll be fine. Okay.
I know, but he's just yelling for no reason.
He wants your attention and love. All right.
Well, too bad.
What do you like about Game of Thrones?
Okay, so the main reasons that I like Game of Thrones, number one, beautiful production quality. Everything is like super high budget. They've got these amazing costumes that you think are intricate, and then you look at a picture and you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much embroidery I didn't even know was there. Like, they're beautiful. And I do think the story is really interesting. And I love specific characters. Yeah. I'm really interested in certain people's storylines. Like, the other ones, I don't know if this is how you watch it, but I'm definitely like, oh, here's a plot line I don't care about. Well, that's sure happening for this 10-minute period.
I did that, but now I've gone through like a second time, and I'm like, I'll pay attention to Stannis this time.
Yeah. Yeah, I was watching with my roommate, and it was her first time, my second time, and I was like, oh, they foreshadow so much, or like, oh, this makes so much sense when you actually pay attention to the Stannis Baratheon part. So like,
or any of the Baratheons. Like, I feel like that answers so many of the questions I had the first time around, was paying attention to any Baratheon whatsoever.
Oh my god, I like didn't even know who Renly was. Like, that's the big reason I started reading the books after, is like, it just filled in all this background info that the show was either too boring or I wasn't paying attention or whatever.
Just like too many words, so many names. All these white people look the same.
Dude, for real. And like, you can't even keep track of who's trying to be kings. Like, oh, you know the idiot show or whatever in right before the Purple Wedding, I think, where they're like, oh, it's the War of Five Kings. I want to be king. No, I want to be king. That actually explained it to me better than watching Game of Thrones has.
It's accurate.
Yeah.
And it puts
just hard to follow
colors on, so it's real good that way.
Yes, I feel like people need to follow color schemes more. Like, the Red Woman and Dany are really good about it, but everybody else kind of wears whatever, and you're like, who are you?
Mostly everything is brown. Just good nice shade of brown. Right.
In the books, Jorah wears like jewel tones, and in the show, he's like all like gross brown and stuff. And you're like, Jorah, what happened to your fashion sense?
Well, he used to have that beautiful blue ascot.
Yeah, that's it.
So many jewel tones. What do I like about Game of Thrones? Mostly that it tricks me into watching a political drama by putting dragons into it. It's like, here's pretty people, here's dragons. You're learning about politics. Because I can't watch anything like House of Cards because it gets boring, and there's no fantasy elements. And there's also, like, cool girls or whatever. But mostly, dragons and wolves.
Yeah, it does trick you. Like, I found out that, as I've been watching the show, that so much of it is based on real life, like, I don't know, wars and like weird events that have happened. And it's taught me way more about history that is, a little dull to learn, but when you're watching it in action, you suddenly care about it, especially when there's characters you like. So yeah, for sure. It's gotten me interested in political thrillers in a way I never thought possible.
Also, if you're listening to this podcast and you want to know more about like the history involving Game of Thrones, send us an email because we're kind of considering during the off season doing the research and actually coming up with podcasts about how the historical relevance of Game of Thrones and what actually could have happened in the past, like trial by combat and things of that nature. So if you're interested in hearing more about that, please send us an email at bamfpod@gmail.com, and we will try and make episodes like that if you want it. All right. So, Mia, what is your favorite character? Who is?
This is such a weird question because, like, I know we're doing this for the podcast, but normally you'd just be like, so Marjorie, right? And, Marjorie's my fave. She's my fave above all faves. I have plenty of faves, but she's my absolute fave. I have a headcanon that she's bisexual because she's very sensual and she's always touching people, and she clearly has had sex, but she still claims to be a virgin whenever she's trying to get on the throne. So I think she's just had sexy times with ladies, and that makes perfect sense to me. Anyway, I think she's amazing. My friend described her as Westeros's PR person. Like, she's getting what she wants, but she's making you feel like you're getting what you want as well. And I feel like that's why I love her.
It's very accurate, and also very accurate to how you live your own life.
Hey, I mean, I like to think I'm a little less manipulative.
Well, I'm about to explain my two favorite characters, and they're both just aggressive and get whatever they want the way they want to, so you can explain that about me, too.
I win.
So I have two favorite characters, which are, I like to think of it as a female and a male favorite character, like you can have two, because there's so many characters. So I have Arya and the Hound, and everyone likes Arya. It's impossible to, dislike Arya unless, I don't know, you're a mean person. But I just like spunky girls, and I was really hoping on, when I first started watching Game of Thrones, I remember sending Mia a message. I was like, I really hope that she becomes a mass murderer. And
I was like, haha, that's funny because she's 12 or whatever, and then it happened.
And then she teamed up with the Hound, who is my other favorite character, and I was like, oh gosh, everything I want to happen is happening. The world is so beautiful. And then I like the Hound, and it's a very specific moment that made me like the Hound, which was when he saved Sansa from being raped. And I was like, oh, because at that point you realize he's not necessarily just following the Lannisters blindly. He's only following his own self-need blindly, and I can respect that in a character. And I mean, Arya's kind of the same way. Neither of them are allegiant to any houses. All of my favorite characters are not allegiant to any houses, like Brienne and stuff like that. And so I really like just being like, I do this for money, or I do this for fame, or I do this for myself and no one else, rather than everyone else being like, I do this for honor. Specifically speaking about my least favorite character in Game of Thrones ever. So do we have anything else we want to talk about while we're here?
I had something, but I forgot. It was probably just about, there's a lot of great characters, and I'm sad I had to pick one, and you picked two, and I didn't know I could pick two.
Of course you could.
But I don't know who my second fave is, so, I'm stuck. No, I mean, I don't know. I love her, but she's not even close to Marjorie. I don't know, especially because the first several seasons she was annoying as hell. I feel like I can't rightly put her on a pedestal like that.
So now we're going to both talk about our experiences with Game of Thrones. Since we've been fans of Game of Thrones, we've been very lucky with our lives in regards to Game of Thrones. I don't know how to explain it. So both Mia and I attend San Diego Comic-Con, and this year we were both at a Game of Thrones, so we both decided to do a whole bunch of Game of Thrones things, so we're each going to tell our personal stories. So mine was when I was flying to San Diego. I was flying Southwest, which is the weirdest part about this story, is that I was flying Southwest, and my flight had a layover in Albuquerque. Or no, maybe Albuquerque. Sure, why not? Anyways.
Yeah, it was definitely Albuquerque.
Yeah, I feel like I was making a lot of Breaking Bad jokes to you and stuff like that.
And I was like, I don't get it.
I literally overheard a dude talking about how his prior meth addiction. I was like, really, Breaking Bad? Okay. Anyways, so I was messaging you on the Facebooks talking about everyone who is annoying me, and then I was like, oh no, George R.R. Martin just walked up. And you're like, what? And George R.R. Martin was on my plane flight to Comic-Con on Southwest Airlines. You know, choose your own seat, Southwest Airlines. So, like, because most of the people on the plane were going to Comic-Con, so that everyone just started going to this, like, hushed silence of, like, what do we do? We all know it's him. He wears a uniform, and it looks like a sailor uniform of a child. We all know it's him. So eventually a group of teenagers goes up to him and is like, will you sign my book? And he's like, yeah, of course. And he's super sweet. So I was like, okay, this is my only chance in my life that I'll probably ever get to meet him. So me and the girl sitting next to me walked up to him and were like, hey, can we take a picture? And he was super sweet, and he complimented my purple hair, being like, oh, I should do that. And I was like, you absolutely should have purple hair, George R. R. Martin, you giant weirdo. He was a super big sweetheart. And I ended up sitting 2 rows behind him on the plane flight there. And at the time, I was trying to read the books. But you just can't read about, like, gross sex stuff written by an old man sitting 2 rows behind him. Just seeing him, knowing he was, like, sweaty, writing those one day up late one night. It did not work out for me. So I just had some whiskey and haven't read the book since.
And didn't you say that nobody sat next to him on the plane? Like, it was a relatively full plane, but he had, like, 2 seats open next to him because no one had the balls?
Yeah, basically what happened is there was this, because his publicist was with him the entire time to kind of, like, protect him from crazy people. And then right next to him, the seat was always open the entire time. It was the very last person who got on the flight who sat on there, and he definitely had no idea who he was.
He was like, why are there so many people on this flight to San Diego? I don't get it.
Which is actually pretty cool. Like, that's one thing I like about the nerd community is they tend to be pretty respectful of things like that and understanding he'd want his space before a terrible weekend of being bombarded constantly.
But when you told me that, I just remember feeling like, oh, this is going to be the best Comic-Con ever, because if that's not an omen, I don't know what is.
The George R. R. Martin omen.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't happen to just anybody. And then you get to the hotel before we did, and you send me a picture, and you're like, our room is awesome. We have free Wi-Fi. Sean Bean's stupid face is across the street from us because he was on this giant billboard.
Yeah.
And then what? Oh, the elevators. We were in the Omni, and that was the year every Game of Thrones thing was in the Omni, and the elevators were these giant posters of Game of Thrones characters. So that was fun.
Which was great for cosplay because we were both cosplaying Game of Thrones.
But terrible at the same time because they were so big that you actually could not get you and the entire elevator in one picture. And we were trying not to look like crazy people and, like, stop the elevator and get everybody to help us, like, take the picture.
Please,
so, like, I have this
creepy
picture.
Photo.
Yeah, and, like, you have this picture of you being Jorah in the Dany elevator, but you, like, cannot tell that it's Dany. And it's those black and white photos, so I'm face blind. I can't tell who's who anyway. So it's just rough, but it was still really fun. Okay, I'm gonna tell my favorite story of all time. Are you ready?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. So, a couple of weeks before Comic-Con on Twitter, and I have to preface this with I'm kind of lucky with Twitter contests for some reason. I think I just enter more than the average person, but for some reason I tend to win more than seems acceptable.
You really do.
I don't know. Whatever. So then Game of Thrones was having this Twitter contest where basically you tweeted with a certain hashtag and you could get invited to their new beer, their Valar Morghulis. Oh gosh, that's not fun to say. It sounds terrible. Whatever.
I know, it's so hard to say Valar Morghulis, whatever.
Well, like, I don't know. I don't want to get, like, too into it. You know what I mean? But
we are creating a Game of Thrones podcast.
I know, but whatever. So anyway, that beer, they were doing a tasting for it. It was like a ceremonial keg tapping kind of situation. And I hate beer, but I love Game of Thrones. So I tweeted with the hashtag. I made Liz do it. I made everyone I know do it. And then they messaged me and they were like, you won. And they sent me the information on Twitter. So I brought Liz with me. And this was like the first night, right? Was it Thursday?
I don't remember. No, because we'd already worn Game of Thrones.
Okay, so it must have been Friday.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever. So it was like one of the first nights though. And it was kind of a hassle, and we were excited but also like kind of nervous. So we're like getting in our Game of Thrones costumes. Oh, that was right, because we had the Aisha Tyler meet and greet earlier that day. So we were wearing our Archer costumes earlier, and then we had to go specifically back to the hotel, change into Game of Thrones, and then go to this event. So we were like kind of like feeling rushed. And like I totally had to change my makeup. You went from a girl to a guy. Like it was not great. Oh, because I was Daenerys and she was Jorah. I feel like that's important. So anyway, so we go to this thing, and it seemed like it was going to be a thing for the fans. So we went in thinking it was mostly going to be fans, but when we get there, it's mostly press. Yeah. And that was weird because we were the only people in costume. And even stranger was, as I walked in, I'm wearing the Karth dress that Daenerys has, the blue one with the gold belt, and I have a cape. And the cape is long enough that somebody, as soon as I walk into the venue where it's at, steps on my cape and rips my dress apart. And this is the kind of dress that you're not wearing a bra with or anything. So I'm just like clutching the fabric to me, like, help me. And this nice woman that worked there and Liz like safety pinned me back together. But I was like so upset because I thought my dress was ruined beyond repair, which it wasn't, but I didn't know at the time. And I was almost naked in front of like this huge like room of people. And it was just a terrible experience. So I was we're like walking in there. We're the only people in costume. I'm all shaken up because my costume was almost destroyed. It was like such a like surreal experience. And then the girl who was helping us was like, do you know who's going to be a guest here? And we're like, there's a guest. And we're both like, is it George R. R. Martin? And she's like, no, he's cute. And we're like, oh, so we get there and she won't tell us who it is.
You have to remember, I'm dressed like Jorah Mormont. I'm like, oh, so a cute boy from Game of Thrones is coming and I have a beard on. Cool.
I was excited because I'm like, I'm blonde, I have makeup on, even though my dress almost fell apart. So whatever, we're both not feeling the best.
Princess. You're my princess, McLeese.
So we're both not feeling the best we've ever felt. We walk in, we're the only people in costume, and we notice that everything's decorated like the wall, like everything is all icy, and there's like, I don't know what, ice picks, and I guess that's it. But we're like, oh, who could it possibly be? You know what? It's probably Jon Snow. If we had to go by context clues, and the girl said that it was a cute guy, it's probably Jon Snow. So we're like, okay, we're all right with him. Like, I'd gladly meet Jon Snow, but nothing I'm like freaking out about. Well, so it ends up being Oberyn Martell, Pedro Pascal, and we both kind of lost it. So like he's the person doing the ceremonial keg tapping. Everybody's taking pictures. We're like freaking out. He serves us beer. We're like, what? We get to like take pictures with him, and like it was just such a surreal experience. And especially because we had been just riding this weird roller coaster ride of emotions, especially me, like your costume breaking is not the ideal situation. And then you meet this guy. And this was right after, spoiler alert, I guess, for anyone that hasn't seen season 4, but this was right after his character had died brutally and we both were not over it. So we're just like, why are you back?
You're alive. Oh no.
It was like so terrible and wonderful all at the same time, but we were like not prepared for it. We were like, I was not ready to be like, if someone had brought up with me that Oberyn Martell died, like, recently, I had been so upset I would like cry immediately. So to see him in the middle of nowhere and he's like, I like your contacts, I'm like, oh
yeah. So for me, he was like, he whispers into my ear and he's like, Jorah is my favorite character. And I was like, ooh. And he's like, what's your name? And I was like, Liz. And his immediate reaction was like, oh shit, it's a girl. I was like, yeah, I've messed up in life so many times.
Oh, you looked wonderful. You were very convincing.
Thanks. It's great.
It was also nice to have you on hand. And we also got on the Game of Thrones Twitter account because they're media people. Obviously, most of the people there were like weird media people, but their media was there and they posted a picture of us and they were like, fucking, what did they call you? They called you like a bear.
Which is true. And I'm also the bear of this podcast. I really took on to that label.
And they were like, oh, that's like the 200-pound version of Daenerys. And I'm like, yeah, well, what can you do?
Also,
like, thanks for telling me what I already know.
I'm Liz Loxley, and I'm the bear.
Oh, I'm Mia Moore, and I'm the Maiden Fair.
Because we're super cute like that.
I mean, we complement each other perfectly.
It's true.
So yeah, that's my weird Game of Thrones experience. I'm getting all these emotions just talking about it.
I know. It's all flooding back to me. That was such a weird night.
It really was. And then we got the beer and we were like talking with other fans. Pedro Pascal is still there playing with someone's Sailor Moon moonstick. And I'm like getting drunk off this beer and I'm just like, I just was not expecting to see him. Just talking about it to anyone who'd listen. It was horrible.
Oh, and then we also did the Game of Thrones experience, which
was also horrible.
Isn't much to talk about because we waited in line for 4 hours. We did make a friend in line, but we waited in line for 4 hours, and then you got to take a picture with, like, it was a green screen, and you got to take a picture with the dragon, but her Daenerys dress was too close to that green, so she just disappeared into a rock.
Yeah, so it did not look cute. We didn't look cute. And so, yeah, that's why there's almost no photo evidence that we even did that.
Yeah. And then I did the Oculus Rift where you go up on the wall, and that was just terrifying.
Yeah,
was,
see,
like,
I didn't do it on
at
purpose.
you.
Like,
Yeah.
I was like, is it scary? And they're like, no, not unless you're afraid of heights. And I'm like, well, that's me, so I'm not going to do it. Like, I've had 3 opportunities to do that exact Game of Thrones thing, and I've never done it because I'm like, nope, I'm too wimpy, sorry.
It's an experience. So do you have anything else you want to add before we end up this podcast?
What are you looking forward to in season 5?
Arya. She's finally supposed to have a storyline again, and I'm super excited.
Yeah, I'm excited too because she's in Bravos, and we're all like, what's going to happen?
She has a skirt.
Yes, she has outfits. Her hair is all cute. I'm excited to see what happens to Sansa unless she dies. Basically, that's my caveat with all of these. If anybody dies, I'm not happy about it. But, like, she's finally, like, becoming a badass. She's finally, like, coming into her own. She's hiding from the world. She's goth Sansa. I'm excited. And then I'm excited about Marjorie because she's my fave forever. And I just want her to be the queen. And we've already seen from the previews that there's definitely a wedding. Hopefully nobody dies at this one. But not likely, knowing George R. R. Martin.
I think this one's called the Yellow Wedding. Yeah.
What's a yellow form of death?
I don't know.
Like yellow
jaundice?
jacket?
I don't know if you
Obviously
die from
it's
jaundice.
bees.
All right, so we're going to wrap it up. Thanks for joining me, Mia.
Oh, yes, anytime.
Thanks for joining us today on the Bear and Maiden Fair podcast. We'll have new episodes every Wednesday following an episode of Game of Thrones. Please subscribe and rate us in iTunes. If you like us, please leave us a review. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at BAMFpod. That's BAMF pod. If you have any questions or comments, you can send us an email at bamfpod@gmail.com. You can follow your hosts on Twitter. I'm at Liz Loxley, and Mia is Exo Mia Moore. Thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you again next week.